In a modest brick ranch house on the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio, a man named Raymond Zielinski spent 40 years building a company out of steel beams, poured concrete, and a stubborn refusal to ever owe anyone an explanation. And the woman he married in his 60s began quietly dismantling it before the flowers on his casket had even started to wilt. His only son, Nathaniel Zielinski, had spent most of his adult life believing that family didn't need contracts, that blood and loyalty were their own kind of paperwork. He was about to learn, in the space of 5 days, 1 email, and a single line inside a courtroom document, exactly how wrong he had been. This is the story of a dying man who saw an ending coming years before anyone else did, and quietly made certain his son would still be standing when it finally arrived. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Nathaniel was 36 years old, a civil engineer who had spent 13 years working project sites for the company his father built from a single flatbed truck. Raymond Zielinski was 69 when he died, a man who wore steel-toed boots to board meetings and never once raised his voice to get a room's attention. Priscilla, his second wife, was 52, 28 years younger than Raymond, poised and unreadable in a way that made people describe her as lovely, without ever quite meaning it as a compliment. 3 questions would hang over everything that followed. What had Raymond actually done in the final 18 months of his life, quietly, without telling his son? Why had he gone to his own attorney instead of the family he supposedly trusted? And what, exactly, was Priscilla about to discover she had actually inherited? Raymond Zielinski started Zielinski & Sons Construction in 1985 with a used flatbed truck, a $15,000 loan from his brother-in-law, and a general contractor's license he studied for at night while framing houses during the day. By the time Nathaniel was born in 1989, the company had 6 employees. By the time Nathaniel was in middle school, it had 40. By the time he graduated from the University of Dayton with a civil engineering degree in 2011, Zielinski & Sons had grown into a respected mid-size commercial contractor, pulling bids across Montgomery, Greene, and Warren counties, with a fleet of equipment, 2 equipment yards off Route 4, and a workforce pushing 90 people. Raymond was not a man who enjoyed attention. He drove the same Ford pickup for 11 years, ate the same Thursday breakfast at the same diner on Wilmington Pike, and told anyone who asked that a tired man makes bad decisions, so he made sure never to be one. Barbara Zielinski, Raymond's first wife and Nathaniel's mother, died of ovarian cancer in the winter of 2001, when Nathaniel was 12 years old. Raymond grieved the way a lot of men from his generation grieved, which is to say, almost silently. Nathaniel remembered hearing him in the kitchen some nights. Well past midnight, the radio turned down so low it was barely more than static, his father sitting alone at the table with a coffee he never drank. He carried that grief the way he carried everything, quietly, like a support beam nobody else could see doing its job. Raymond met Priscilla Vance in 2009 at a Chamber of Commerce mixer he had only attended because a client insisted. She was 41, recently divorced, working as an office manager for a commercial real estate firm in Beaver Creek. She was polished, quick with a compliment, and careful, always careful, never quite letting anyone see past the surface of her. Nathaniel tried to like her. He genuinely did. She was never cruel to him, not outright. She was something harder to describe, cordially distant, the way a hotel front desk clerk is friendly to a guest they know they'll never see again. Every conversation had an invisible fence around it. Every Thanksgiving had a faint, polite chill running underneath the small talk. They married in the spring of 2011. By 2020, Priscilla had made herself a fixture at Zielinski & Sons, holding the title of Director of Administration, overseeing payroll, vendor relationships, and accounts receivable, despite having no background in construction. Raymond bragged to his golfing buddies that she'd really stepped up. Nathaniel noticed smaller things: a vendor invoice that seemed padded, a payroll line for a name he didn't recognize, mileage reimbursements for routes that didn't match any active job site. He raised it once, carefully, over his father's kitchen table in the fall of 2021. Raymond looked at him with tired eyes and said, "Nathaniel, I'm 64 years old. I'm not going to spend whatever time I've got left auditing my own marriage." Nathaniel dropped it. He would spend the next 3 years wishing he hadn't. Raymond was diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis in the early spring of 2023, a progressive lung condition his pulmonologist at Miami Valley Hospital described gently but plainly as something that would only move in one direction. Raymond took the news the way he took everything, without drama and with a legal pad. He started slowing down at the office, handing more of the daily project oversight to his longtime operations manager, Terrence Boyd, a steady, unshowy man who had been with the company for 14 years. What nobody but Raymond and one other person knew was that in September of 2023, 6 months after his diagnosis, Raymond drove alone to a law office on North Main Street in downtown Dayton and asked to speak with an estate attorney named Dennis Holbrook, a man who had handled the company's contracts and disputes for over a decade. Raymond told Holbrook he'd been noticing discrepancies in the books for 2 years and had finally started keeping his own private ledger to track them. He didn't have proof of who was responsible, not yet, but he had instincts, and he trusted them the way he trusted a load calculation. Over 6 careful weeks that fall, working with Holbrook and a trust attorney named Paula Ibarra, Raymond restructured the entire operational side of Zielinski & Sons construction. The equipment fleet, the 2 yards, the active contracts, the licenses, the workforce, and the operating accounts were legally transferred into a new holding entity, Miami Valley Industrial Holdings LLC, placed inside a trust, the Raymond J. Zielinski Family Trust, with Dennis Holbrook named as trustee and Nathaniel named as the beneficiary responsible for the business's future control. The original company name, Zielinski & Sons Construction LLC, was left standing, but by the time the restructuring closed in late October 2023, it held nothing: no equipment, no contracts, no employees, no property, a name and nothing behind it. 1 month later, in November 2023, Raymond sat down with a different attorney entirely, one recommended by Priscilla, and executed a new will. That will left Priscilla the family home on Wildflower Court, all personal financial accounts held jointly or individually, and 100% ownership of Zielinski & Sons Construction LLC. He never mentioned to her that the name and the value behind it had already parted ways. Raymond's health declined steadily through the winter. He stopped going into the office altogether by January. He talked about retirement constantly and somehow never quite got around to it, joking that a man who retires from a company still standing is a man who did it right. He died on a Tuesday morning in March 2025, at home, in the bedroom he'd shared with Priscilla for 14 years. He was 69. Nathaniel got the phone call at 6:52 in the morning and drove from his house in Kettering to Wildflower Court in under 18 minutes, which tells you everything about how carefully he was driving. His father looked peaceful. Whatever anyone believes about where people go afterward, Raymond Zielinski looked like a man who had finally set down something heavy and was, for the first time in a long while, resting. Nathaniel stood in that bedroom for a long time. In the kitchen, he could hear Priscilla on the phone with the funeral home, her voice low, efficient, businesslike. He noticed it. He filed it away. He told himself he was being unkind because he was grieving. The funeral was held the following Friday at a church off Woodman Drive, packed with employees, subcontractors, and men in work boots standing shoulder to shoulder with women in black dresses, all holding the same stunned quiet for a man who had built things that would outlast every single person in that room. Priscilla sat in the front pew. She cried at the appropriate moments. She thanked people graciously at the reception afterward. She was, as always, the picture of composure. 5 days later, on a Wednesday morning, Nathaniel received an email from an attorney named Gordon Fitch, based out of Cincinnati, informing him that he represented Priscilla Zielinski and that pursuant to Raymond Zielinski's most recently executed will, dated November 2023, Mrs. Zielinski was the sole beneficiary of the estate, including the family residence, all personal accounts, and 100% of the shares of Zielinski & Sons Construction LLC. The email requested that Nathaniel contact the office within 5 business days to arrange for the orderly retrieval of any personal property he wished to remove from the family home. Nathaniel read that email 4 times at his kitchen table in Kettering. He expected anger, and for about 30 seconds, he got it. A hot, electrical flash that came and went fast. What replaced it was something colder and far more familiar. The same feeling he got on a job site when a subcontractor tried to cut a corner on something structural, and he had 15 seconds to decide how he was going to handle it. He made coffee. He sat back down. He called Dennis Holbrook, the attorney who had drafted his father's business contracts for a decade, and asked him one question. What did he know about a will dated November 2023? There was a long pause on the line. "Nathaniel," Holbrook said, "before you do anything else, I need you in my office tomorrow morning. There are things I need to show you in person." Holbrook's office on North Main Street had 2 cups of coffee waiting when Nathaniel arrived at 8:30 the next morning. Along with a stack of documents Holbrook didn't waste time getting into. Raymond had come to him in September 2023, worried, having noticed discrepancies in the company's financial accounts he couldn't fully explain. He didn't want to alarm Nathaniel without proof. What Raymond had done, quietly, over 6 weeks that fall, with Holbrook's help, was move every asset of actual value out of Zielinski & Sons Construction LLC and into a family trust and holding entity, naming Nathaniel as the beneficiary for operational control of the business. The November 2023 will Gordon Fitch was citing was completely real and completely valid. It simply left Priscilla 100% ownership of a company that, by the time the will was signed, held nothing. Holbrook looked across the desk at Nathaniel. "She's going to fight this," he said. "Fitch is competent, and he's going to argue your father intentionally stripped assets from the estate to defeat her spousal rights." "Can he win?" Nathaniel asked. "Not easily," Holbrook said. "The restructuring is clean, well documented, and completed a full month before the will was ever signed. Ohio law gives a surviving spouse a right to an elective share of the augmented estate, but the timing and the paper trail are going to make a fraud argument very hard to sustain." Then he leaned forward with the dry, careful look of a man who had spent 20 years in litigation. "Here's what I'm recommending. Don't fight this like it's a fight. Give her exactly what the will says. The house, the accounts, the LLC. Give her all of it." Nathaniel sat with that for a moment. "And then what?" he asked. Holbrook allowed himself something close to a smile. "And then we let Gordon Fitch open the books." Priscilla texted Nathaniel 3 days after the funeral, which told him plenty about how curated the grief had been. "I'd appreciate it if we could handle this like adults," her text read. "Gordon will be in touch." He read it twice, set the phone face down, and made himself scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and black coffee. No butter, just heat and patience. Exactly the way his father used to make it every Saturday morning. He'd been unable to stop making it that way since the funeral. Gordon Fitch called Holbrook the following Wednesday and laid out Priscilla's position with the confidence of a man who expected resistance. The will was valid. She expected full and immediate transfer of every asset listed, including the construction company, and any attempt to introduce alternative asset structures would be met with, in his words, scorched earth litigation. Holbrook's answer was simple. Nathaniel would not contest the will. He would comply in full. All shares of the LLC would transfer to Priscilla Zielinski exactly as written. There was a pause on Fitch's end. That's reasonable," he said, clearly wrong-footed by the absence of a fight. "Nathaniel just wants his father's wishes respected," Holbrook told him. During the weeks between the funeral and the hearing, Nathaniel kept showing up to the yards and job sites, where Terrence Boyd, the company's operations manager, ran daily operations with the same unsentimental competence he always had, because projects don't pause for a family's private reckoning. The crew knew something was shifting. An ownership transition after the founder's death is impossible to fully hide, but paychecks cleared and job sites stayed on schedule because the holding entity structure had fully insulated operations from whatever was happening in probate court. Priscilla, as far as anyone could tell, had no idea any of it was already decided. Nathaniel had one direct conversation with her during that stretch, a Wednesday afternoon call while he sat in his truck outside a job site in Beaver Creek eating a sandwich. "I don't want this to be adversarial," she told him, her voice pitched at exactly the right register of warmth. "Your father loved you. I know that. I'd like us to still have some kind of relationship. As family. I think that's a reasonable goal," Nathaniel said, matching her tone precisely, and meant almost none of it. He finished his sandwich in the truck afterward, the asphalt outside shimmering with early spring heat, and thought about the word she'd used. Family. He didn't yet know that in 4 days, she would never use that word with him again. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in April 2025 at the Montgomery County Common Pleas Court in downtown Dayton. Holbrook had filed the paperwork for the voluntary, uncontested transfer of every LLC interest exactly as Fitch had demanded. No opposition, no fight. Simply execution of the will as written. Nathaniel wore a gray blazer and dark jeans, the kind of outfit his father would have called dressed enough. Holbrook was waiting in the hallway with his associate, Paula Ibarra, the trust attorney who had architected the holding entity and who looked entirely, quietly, unbothered. Priscilla arrived with Gordon Fitch at 8:45, dressed sharply in a black blazer, the full presentation of a woman expecting to be confirmed in possession of something significant. Fitch was tall, silver-haired, and carried himself with the polished confidence of an expensive attorney who came prepared for a war. The proceeding itself was administrative, no jury, no theater, just a judge, a court reporter, and the transfer of an estate. The judge reviewed the filings, confirmed the November 2023 will's validity, and confirmed that Nathaniel Zielinski had consented, without contest, to the transfer of all LLC interests to Priscilla Zielinski. She asked Holbrook directly whether his client objected. "None, Your Honor," Holbrook said. "Mr. Zielinski is in full agreement with the transfer, as documented." Priscilla settled back in her chair. Nathaniel watched Fitch's shoulders drop half an inch, the visible relief of a litigator who had prepared for a fight that apparently wasn't coming. The judge approved the transfer and signed the order. That was the moment Fitch reached for the supporting business asset schedule, the itemized documentation of exactly what Zielinski & Sons Construction LLC actually contained, which he was required, under standard procedure, to review for the record before the transfer formally closed. He opened the folder. He read the first page. He turned to the second. He stopped. Nathaniel watched his face change the way a wall changes when something inside it gives way. Not all at once, but in stages, as his brain processed the number in front of him and briefly refused to accept it. He looked up at Holbrook, who looked back, entirely still, the way a man looks when he already knows every word on every page in front of him. Fitch looked back down and read the line a second time. The single sentence describing the net asset value of Zielinski & Sons Construction LLC as of the date of transfer, following the October 2023 restructuring into the Raymond J. Zielinski Family Trust. Net asset value, 0. The silence in that hearing room lasted about 4 seconds. In a courtroom, 4 seconds is a very long time. Fitch set the folder down with the deliberate care of a man trying to keep his hands from shaking, removed his glasses, and said, "Counsel, I'd like to request a brief recess." The judge granted it. Priscilla leaned toward him immediately. "What's wrong? What does it say?" "Not here," Fitch said, his voice a wall. They stepped into the hallway, and through the glass panel beside the door, Nathaniel watched her expression move through 3 or 4 distinct phases in under 30 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, and finally the sharp, jaw-set fury of a person realizing she'd been outmaneuvered. She pushed back into the room before Fitch could stop her. "What did you do to that company?" she asked Nathaniel directly, her voice controlled but only barely. "I didn't do anything to the company," he said. "My father did. 18 months ago. That's fraud. That's illegal. He stripped the assets to cut me out. He restructured his business," Holbrook said smoothly, "which is the legal right of any owner. The restructuring was completed a full month before your will was signed, fully documented, with a clear and auditable rationale. Mr. Zielinski was entirely within his rights. Whether you consider that the same thing as cutting you out is a matter of perspective." The proceedings resumed. The transfer closed exactly as written. Priscilla Zielinski received 100% ownership of a company with no equipment, no contracts, no employees, and no value. She had inherited a letterhead. In the parking garage afterward, Holbrook told Nathaniel what came next was predictable. Priscilla would instruct Fitch to challenge the restructuring, filing a claim for her elective share of the augmented estate under Ohio law, a right that lets a surviving spouse claim a portion of assets even when a will says otherwise, particularly when transfers made shortly before death look designed to defeat that right. "She can file," Holbrook said. "Whether she wins is different. We have your father's private ledger from 2021 forward. We have the vendor discrepancies. We have a documented business reason for every step. That's a hard case for her to make." Fitch filed the claim within the month, exactly as predicted, and both sides moved into discovery, depositions, financial records, forensic accounting. Priscilla hired her own forensic accountant, hoping to find grounds to challenge the restructuring as fraudulent. What her own accountant found instead was something considerably worse for her. The same vendor invoices Nathaniel had flagged to his father back in 2021, the ones Raymond had quietly started tracking on his own, became central to the discovery process. Across 16 months of company records, a pattern emerged. Inflated invoices from a vendor called Vance Logistics Solutions, a single-member LLC registered in Nevada with no verifiable physical address, its payments tracing back to a personal account with Priscilla Zielinski as sole signatory. $310,000 moved out of the company over 16 months under an invoice trail that led directly back to her. Holbrook didn't use it as a threat. He filed it with the court as part of the elective share proceeding as relevant financial history bearing on the augmented estate calculation, specifically as a reduction the court might apply, given what a reasonable person would call misconduct. Gordon Fitch withdrew from the case 11 days later, citing a conflict of interest, which is the polite legal phrase for, "I am not going to be in the room when this gets worse." Priscilla retained a new attorney, a sharp, younger woman out of Cincinnati named Melissa Draper, who understood within days that her client's negotiating position had effectively collapsed. Within 3 weeks, Draper proposed a settlement. Priscilla would drop the elective share claim entirely, keep the house on Wildflower Court and the personal accounts, and sign a full release of any interest in the trust, the holding company, or the business's future operations. In exchange, the vendor fraud documentation would remain part of the civil settlement and would not be referred to the Montgomery County Prosecutor's Office. Holbrook brought the offer to Nathaniel on a Tuesday evening, city lights coming on outside his office window on North Main. "It's a clean resolution," Holbrook said. "She walks away with real assets. You walk away without years of criminal referral proceedings hanging over the company. Does she deserve that?" Nathaniel asked. Holbrook looked at him steadily. "Deserve is a question for a preacher. I'm a lawyer. What I can tell you is that this protects the business and the 90 people who depend on it, and it closes the chapter cleanly. Your father didn't build this to punish her. He built it to protect what 90 families count on." Nathaniel knew he was right, and signed the settlement the following Wednesday, 14 weeks after his father's funeral. He drove out to a warehouse project in the Vandalia area that afternoon, where Terrence Boyd had kept things running through every bit of it, the steel already going up on schedule, exactly the way it always did. Nathaniel stood at the edge of the site for a long time, listening to the machinery and the ordinary, irreplaceable sound of something being built. His father had stood on 100 sites exactly like it, in different decades, listening to the same sound, the sound of something meant to last. The lesson Nathaniel carried out of all of it wasn't that you should distrust anyone who marries into your family. It was quieter and harder than that. Love and due diligence had never actually been opposites. You could love someone completely and still read the paperwork. You could be loyal to your family and still know exactly what you owned and what the documents actually said. His father had known. He'd simply acted on it a little later than anyone would have liked. And when he finally did, he was thorough enough that it was still enough. Was it justice? Or was it simply a father protecting what he'd spent 40 years building? That question is one worth sitting with. So here's what we want to know from you. If you were in Nathaniel's position, if your father had quietly protected everything he built without telling you how, right up until the moment it mattered, would you have wanted to know sooner? Or do you think Raymond made the right call keeping it to himself until the very end? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one, and some of the most powerful stories on this channel have come directly from things our viewers have lived through themselves. If this story pulled at something in you, if it made you think about your own family, your own inheritance, your own quiet instincts you talked yourself out of trusting, We've got another story like this one dropping soon, and you will not want to miss where it goes. It involves a second marriage, a locked filing cabinet, and a discovery that took nearly 20 years to surface. If you haven't already, take a second right now and hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you never miss when we post. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories like Raymond and Nathaniel's, stories about the quiet ways people protect the people they love, even when they run out of time to say it out loud. Thank you for spending this time with us. We'll see you in the next one.